My son sent me a message at 11:42 p.m. It read, "Don't come to our house anymore. We want peace." I looked at the glowing screen in the dark, then at the checkbook sitting on my desk. They wanted peace. I accepted their peace quietly. I did not call. I did not argue. I simply turned off the lights. But the next morning, he knocked on my door with an invoice in his hand. He thought I was an ATM machine with a heartbeat. He forgot I was also the engineer who built the foundation he was standing on. Before I tell you how I evicted my own son from his perfect life, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Hit subscribe if you believe respect is a two-way street. I am Douglas Carter, 68 years old. For 40 years, I worked as a structural engineer. My job was to calculate loads, stress points, and braking thresholds. I built bridges that could withstand hurricanes and skyscrapers that could survive earthquakes, but I failed to see the structural fractures in my own home until the roof was already collapsing on my head. It was a Tuesday night. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy when you live alone. I was in the garage, the smell of sawdust and varnish filling the air. I was fixing a small wooden bookshelf for my grandson Leo. He had turned 7 last week, and he loved dinosaurs. I wanted to surprise him. I was sanding down a rough edge on the top shelf when my phone buzzed on the workbench. It vibrated against the wood, a harsh, intrusive sound. I wiped the sawdust from my hand and picked it up. It was a text from Brandon. My only son. The boy I had raised alone after his mother passed away 2 decades ago. The message was short. Brutal. Dad, Brittany and I have talked. You come over too much. It is overwhelming. We need space to be a family without you hovering. Don't come to the house anymore unless you are specifically invited. We want peace. I read it twice, then a third time. I waited for the follow-up text. The one that said, "Just kidding," or the one that said, "Sorry, wrong number." But the screen just went black. I stood there in the cold garage. My hands were still rough from the sandpaper. I thought about the last time I visited. It was 2 days ago. I had brought over a bag of organic apples because I knew Brittany liked juicing. I had fixed the leaking faucet in their kitchen because Brandon didn't know how to use a wrench. I played with Leo for 20 minutes while they sat on their phones. I didn't think I was hovering. I thought I was being a father. I thought I was being a grandfather. I looked at the wooden shelf. I had spent 3 weeks building it. I carefully placed the sandpaper down. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. Engineers don't scream. We analyze the data. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet from a pizza place, was a calendar. I looked at tomorrow's date. The 15th. The 15th was an expensive day. It was the day the automatic transfer went through for Leo's private school tuition. It was the day I wrote the check for the mortgage on the house Brandon and Brittany lived in. Technically, the house belonged to the Carter Family Trust, but they called it their house. They painted the walls. They chose the curtains. I just paid the bills. We want peace. The words echoed in the empty kitchen. They wanted the peace of my absence, but they certainly didn't want the peace of my financial withdrawal. I sat down at the kitchen table. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. I didn't write a paragraph about how much I loved them. I didn't remind them of the sacrifices I made. I just typed 2 words. Understood. Done. I hit send. Then I went upstairs, turned off the lights, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I was calculating. I was looking at the load-bearing walls of my relationship with my son, and I realized there was nothing holding it up anymore except my money. The next morning, the sun came up just like it always does. I made coffee, black, no sugar. I was sitting in my armchair reading the Wall Street Journal when I heard a knock at the door. It was a rapid, impatient knock. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. I opened the door. Brandon was standing there. He looked stressed. He was wearing his suit, the navy blue one I bought him for his promotion interview last year. He didn't look like a man who had sent a text effectively disowning his father 8 hours ago. He looked like a man in a hurry. "Hey, Dad," he said, stepping inside without waiting for me to move. "Do you have coffee? I am running late." I watched him walk into my kitchen. He opened the cabinet, took out a mug, and poured himself a cup from my pot. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if the text message was just a dream I had. He took a sip and grimaced. "You really need to buy better beans, Dad. This tastes like mud." I closed the front door slowly. I walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. I looked at his expensive haircut. I looked at the watch on his wrist. I looked for a sign of remorse. I looked for an apology. He put the mug down and pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. "Look about the text last night," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic about it. Brittany is just stressed. She feels like she can't relax in her own home when guests are over. We just need boundaries. You understand boundaries, right, guests? I was a guest, in the house I paid for, in the house where my grandson slept." "I understand boundaries," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "Good," Brandon said. He smoothed the paper out on the kitchen table. "Anyway, bad timing, but the transmission on the SUV is acting up. I took it to the mechanic yesterday. It is the gearbox. They won't release the car until the invoice is paid, and my credit card is maxed out because of the vacation we booked for next month." He slid the paper toward me. It was an invoice from the dealership, $2,400. "I need you to handle this, Dad," he said, checking his phone. "I have a meeting at 9. I can't drive the rental to the client site. It looks unprofessional. Just write the check and I will pick up the car on my way to work." He didn't ask. He commanded. He expected. I looked at the invoice. Then I looked at my son. For 32 years, I had smoothed every bump in his road. I paid for college. I got him his job through my old contacts. I bought the house. I paid the taxes. I thought I was helping him build a life. But I wasn't. I was crippling him. I had turned him into a man who could insult his father at midnight and demand money at dawn. I walked over to the drawer where I kept my checkbook. I could feel Brandon's eyes on me. I could feel his relief. He thought the crisis was over. He thought the boundaries were established. I stay away, but my money stays close. I pulled out the checkbook. I took my fountain pen from my pocket. It was a Mont Blanc, a retirement gift from my firm. Heavy, elegant. Brandon let out a sigh. "Thanks, Dad. You are a lifesaver." Seriously, Brittany was freaking out. "We will bring Leo over in a couple of weeks, maybe. Once things settle down." A couple of weeks. Maybe. I opened the checkbook. I wrote the date. I wrote the name of the dealership on the payee line. I wrote out the amount. $2,400.00. I signed my name at the bottom. Douglas Carter. I looked at the check. It was a perfect piece of paper. It represented safety. It represented a problem solved. I tore the check out of the book. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. Rip. Brandon reached out his hand. He was already moving toward the door. Great. I gotta run. I held the check in my left hand. I looked him in the eye. "You said you wanted peace, Brandon." "Yeah, Dad, I know. Let's not rehash it. Just give me the check." I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of an engineer who finally found the source of the structural failure. "Peace is expensive, son," I said. Then with 2 slow, deliberate movements, I tore the check in half. Then I put the halves together and tore them again. Brandon froze. His hand was still outstretched, hovering in the air. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the confetti of blue paper falling from my fingers onto the linoleum floor. "Dad," he whispered, "what are you doing?" "I am respecting your boundaries," I said. "You want to be a separate family. You want to be independent. You want distance. I am giving you all of that." "Are you crazy?" he shouted, his face turning red. "I need my car." "I have a meeting that is a problem for the man who owns the car," I said. "And since you want to be the man of your own house, you are the man who pays for his own transmission." "You are punishing me," he spat out. "This is petty. This is childish. Just because we asked for some privacy," I said. "I am not punishing you. I am retiring. I am retiring from the job of being your bank." I pointed to the door. "Get out of my house, Brandon." He stood there for a moment, his fists clenched. He looked at the torn paper on the floor, then back at me. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before. He saw the end of the line. "Fine," he sneered. "Be a bitter old man. See if we ever invite you over again. You are not going to see Leo until you apologize for this." He turned and stormed out. He slammed the front door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the kitchen. The silence returned. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. It felt like the dust settling after a controlled demolition. I looked at the calendar again. The 15th. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Brandon. I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Sylvia Ross, attorney at law. She answered on the second ring. "Douglas, is everything okay?" "It is 7:30 in the morning." "Everything is fine, Sylvia," I said. "I need an appointment. Today. I need to make some changes to the family trust, specifically regarding the residency clause for the property on Oak Creek Drive." There was a pause on the other end. Sylvia was smart. She knew what that meant. "Are you sure, Doug?" she asked softly. "Once we start this process, it is hard to stop." I looked at the torn check on the floor. "I am sure," I said. "They wanted peace, Sylvia. I am going to give them a war they can't afford. But first, I am going to finish my coffee." I hung up the phone. The coffee was cold, but it tasted better than it had in years. I went to the garage and looked at the wooden shelf again. I picked up the sandpaper. I had work to do, but this time I wasn't building something for them. I was dismantling what I had built plank by plank, dollar by dollar. That was the beginning. I didn't know it yet, but I had just lit a fuse that would blow up my entire family. And the explosion was going to be spectacular. The drive to downtown Seattle was a blur of gray concrete and rain. I did not turn on the radio. My mind was already rehearsing the conversation, structuring the arguments like I was preparing for a courtroom defense. I parked my old sedan in the underground garage of the Glass Tower, where Sylvia Ross managed the estates of the city's quiet millionaires. I was one of them, though my son seemed to have forgotten that detail. He looked at my worn-out shoes and saw poverty. He never looked at the bank statements to see the power. Sylvia did not hug me when I walked into her corner office. She knew me better than that. She saw the set of my jaw and the folder tucked under my arm. She simply gestured to the leather chair opposite her mahogany desk and pressed a button on her intercom to hold all calls. Sylvia and I went back 30 years. She had handled my wife's probate. She had set up the Carter Family Trust. She was the only person on earth who knew exactly how much I was worth down to the last cent. I sat down and placed the torn pieces of the check on her pristine desk. They were the only chaotic element in the room. "I am activating Clause 14B, I said. Sylvia paused. Her hand hovered over her laptop. She looked at the torn paper, then up at me over the rim of her reading glasses. Her eyes were sharp, analytical. "Clause 14B. she repeated slowly. The harmony and respect clause. Douglas, we wrote that in as a nuclear option. We never intended for you to actually use it. It gives the trustee absolute power to revoke beneficiary privileges based on conduct detrimental to the family unit. If you pull that lever, there is no going back. It is a declaration of war. I leaned forward. I did not raise my voice. They declared war first, Sylvia. They just didn't think I had any ammunition. Open the file. I want to see the ledger. I want to see every dime I have spent on Brandon and Brittany in the last 5 years. Sylvia typed a few commands. The printer in the corner hummed to life. While it worked, she turned her screen toward me. It is ugly, Doug, she warned. I have been trying to tell you this for years, but you always waved me off. You called it helping. I called it hemorrhaging. I looked at the spreadsheet. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't just the mortgage on the house on Oak Creek Drive. It was the property taxes, the insurance, the homeowners association fees. Then there were the supplemental transfers. $5,000 here for a credit card bill. $3,000 there for a vacation they couldn't afford. The private school tuition for Leo paid directly from my investment dividends. I ran my finger down the column. The total for the last fiscal year alone was over $120,000. That was more than I spent on myself in a decade. I looked at the line item for the house. The house was the centerpiece of their arrogance. Who holds the deed? Sylvia, I asked, though I knew the answer. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the legal reality out loud. The Carter Family Trust holds the deed, she said, her voice crisp and professional. Brandon and Brittany are classified as resident beneficiaries. They have the right of occupancy solely at the discretion of the trustee. That is you. They do not own a single brick of that house. They don't even own the paint on the walls. And the employment contract, I asked. Sylvia pulled a second file. Brandon is listed as a consultant for your holding company. He receives a monthly stipend of $6,000. His job description is vague, mostly business development. Has he developed any business? I asked. Sylvia didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was the answer. I sat back. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. It wasn't anger anymore. It was shame. I had created this monster. I had fed it with checks and silence. I had taught my son that money was like rain, something that just fell from the sky whenever he needed it. I had robbed him of the struggle that makes a man a man. Now I had to be the drought. Draft the documents, I said. Sylvia took a deep breath. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. Okay, let's be specific. What are we cutting? Everything, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Sylvia began to write, her pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. First, I continued, my voice steady, I want a notice to quit. Revocation of resident beneficiary status for the property on Oak Creek Drive. Give them 30 days. That is the legal minimum. Correct, Sylvia said, not looking up. 30 days to vacate. If they refuse, we file for formal eviction on day 31. It will go on public record. It will destroy their credit score and their ability to rent anywhere decent. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the text message. We want peace. I am prepared, I said. Next, the consulting contract. Terminate it immediately. Use the at-will clause. No severance. He has been paid for work he never did for 5 years. That is his severance. Sylvia nodded, turning the page. And the tuition, she asked softly. This is the hard one, Doug. Leo. I closed my eyes for a second. I saw Leo's face. I saw him smiling when I gave him the bookshelf. He was the innocent casualty in this war. But if I kept paying, Brandon would just use that money for himself. I had to bypass the parents to save the child. Close the direct transfer for tuition, I commanded. But open a new 529 education savings plan. Put the full amount for his schooling in there. Lock it down so that only I can authorize disbursements directly to the institution. Brandon and Brittany cannot touch a penny of it. If they want to keep him in that private school, they can pay the monthly fees themselves. If they can't, the money will be waiting for Leo when he goes to college. Sylvia stopped writing. She looked at me with a strange expression. It was a mix of fear and admiration. "You have thought this through," she said. "I am an engineer, Sylvia. I don't start a demolition until I have calculated the blast radius. There is one more thing," I added. "The renovation loan." Sylvia frowned. "Which one? There have been 3. The one from 2 years ago. The $40,000 for the kitchen remodel. I lent it to them from my personal savings, not the trust. There is a promissory note, isn't there?" "Yes," she said. "A demand note. Payable in full upon the demand of the lender." "Call it in," I said. Sylvia dropped her pen. "Doug," she whispered. "If you call in that note, and they can't pay, which we know they can't, you can garnish Brandon's wages. You can place a lien on any assets societal they actually do own. You will bankrupt them within a week." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city below. People were rushing to work, worrying about bills, worrying about their futures. My son was probably sitting in his office right now, bragging to his colleagues about his new car, confident that his father would fix everything by lunchtime. "He told me he wanted to be independent," I said to the glass. "He told me I was suffocating them. I am just giving him some fresh air." I turned back to Sylvia. "Execute the documents, Sylvia. All of them. Send the notice to quit via certified mail. I want the courier to put it in his hand. I want a signature required." Sylvia typed for 20 minutes. The sound of the keys was like a machine gun in the quiet office. I sat there and watched the printer spit out page after page of legal destruction. These weren't just papers. They were the end of my son's childhood. He was 32, but his childhood was ending today at 10:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. She slid the stack of documents across the desk. She handed me a pen. It was a heavy black rollerball. Read them carefully. "Douglas," she said formally, "once you sign these, the mechanism starts. I cannot stop the process once the notice is served." I didn't read them. I knew what they said. I trusted Sylvia. More importantly, I trusted my own resolve. I signed my name on the first page. Douglas Carter, trustee. I signed the second page. Douglas Carter, lender. I signed the third page. Douglas Carter, father. The last signature was the hardest. My hand shook just for a fraction of a second. But I pressed down hard, carving the ink into the paper. I put the pen down. "It is done," I said. Sylvia organized the papers into a folder. She looked tired. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I felt lighter. The weight of the checkbook was gone. The weight of the expectation was gone. I felt a strange, cold clarity. "I am going to go home," I said. "I am going to finish sanding that bookshelf. And then I am going to wait." "Wait for what?" "For the noise," I said. "They asked for peace. But when they get this envelope, they are going to make a lot of noise. And for the first time in my life, I am not going to do anything to stop it." I walked out of the office. I didn't look back. I took the elevator down to the garage. I sat in my car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I looked at my phone. No new messages. Brandon was probably still waiting for me to call him about the car. He probably thought I was sulking. He had no idea that I had just fired him from the position of being my son. I started the engine. The old sedan rumbled to life. It was reliable. It was sturdy. It didn't pretend to be a sports car. It was just like me. As I drove out into the daylight, I felt a single tear roll down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. There would be no more tears. Tears were for people who were helpless. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was the trustee, and I had just cleaned house. The next 7 days were the quietest of my life. For the first time in 20 years, my phone did not ring with an emergency. There were no texts about broken appliances, no panic about late credit card payments, no guilt trips about how other grandfathers bought their families vacations to Hawaii. There was just silence. And it was magnificent. I woke up at 6 a.m. not because I had to rush to a job site or because I was anxious about Brandon's finances, but because the sun was hitting the rhododendrons in my backyard. I made my coffee. I sat on the porch. I watched the steam rise from the mug and dissolve into the cool morning air. I realized that for decades I had been living in a state of low-level chronic stress. It was a hum in the back of my mind, a constant worry about what crisis Brandon would manufacture next. Now the hum was gone. I started walking in the mornings. I walked down to the pier and watched the fishermen prep their boats. I bought fresh salmon directly from the dock. I cooked dinner for myself, actually sitting at the dining table instead of eating over the sink like a bachelor. I even read a book cover to cover. It was a biography of Theodore Roosevelt. I read a line that stuck with me: do what you can with what you have where you are. I felt like Teddy would have approved of what I was doing. I was doing what I could to save my dignity. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, I knew the silence meant something entirely different. To Brandon and Brittany, my silence was a tactic. They thought I was pouting. They thought I was sitting in the dark, regretting the torn check, waiting for permission to apologize. They were probably telling their friends that I was having a senile episode. They had no idea that the notice to quit was currently sitting in a mail sorting facility, making its way toward their front door like a slow-moving torpedo. It was Friday afternoon when the silence finally broke. I was in the living room organizing my old vinyl records. I had just put a Dave Brubeck jazz album on the turntable when the phone rang. The screen flashed a picture of Leo. My heart jumped for a second, thinking it was my grandson. But then I saw the name underneath. Brittany. I let it ring 3 times. I lowered the volume on the record player, but I didn't turn it off. I wanted the background music. It kept me calm. It reminded me that this was my house and I was in control. I slid my finger across the screen. "Hello," I said. "Hi, Dad." Brittany's voice was high-pitched, practically vibrating with forced cheerfulness. It was the voice she used when she wanted something expensive. It was the voice of a predator disguised as a cheerleader. "Hello, Brittany." I didn't ask how she was. I didn't ask about Brandon. I just waited. "So we haven't heard from you all week," she continued, breezing past the awkwardness. "We were getting a little worried. You know, with your blood pressure and everything. We just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I am fine," I said. "My blood pressure has actually been excellent this week." "Oh, that is good. That is so good. Listen, the reason I am calling is that we are finalizing the plans for Leo's birthday party next Saturday. Can you believe he is going to be 8? Time flies, right?" She paused, waiting for me to coo and get sentimental. I remained silent. Anyway, she pressed on the cheerfulness, straining a bit at the edges. "We decided to go with a space theme this year. We rented out the Galaxy Zone at the mall. You know, the one with the laser tag and the arcade. It is going to be amazing. All his friends from private school are coming." "That sounds nice for him," I said. "Right, so here is the thing. The deposit is due today, and the catering bill has to be paid up front. Since you usually handle the birthday budget as your gift to Leo, I just wanted to make sure you were sending the transfer today. We were thinking $5,000 this year. The venue is a bit more exclusive, and we want to get him that new gaming console he has been asking for. $5,000. She asked for it as casually as if she were asking for a cup of sugar. She had completely ignored the fact that 3 days ago I had kicked her husband out of my house. She assumed the peace they wanted didn't extend to my wallet. She assumed the Bank of Dad was still open for business, despite the earlier robbery attempt. I took a sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot, soothing. I have already taken care of Leo's gift, I said calmly. There was a pause. I could hear her tapping on a keyboard in the background. She was checking their joint bank account online. Oh, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I am looking at the Wells Fargo account right now, Dad. I don't see a transfer. Did you send it to Brandon's personal account? You know, we use the joint one for household expenses. I didn't send it to Brandon's account, I said. And I didn't send it to the joint account. Her typing stopped. What do you mean? Did you send a check? You know the mail is slow, Dad. We need to pay the venue by 5 o'clock today, or we lose the reservation. I didn't send a check either, I said. Brittany's patience snapped. The cheerleader mask fell off, revealing the entitled manager underneath. Okay. Douglas, stop playing games. Where's the money you promised Leo a good birthday? Are you really going to punish an 8-year-old boy because you had a little argument with Brandon? That is low even for you. I leaned back in my armchair. The Dave Brubeck saxophone solo was reaching a crescendo. I am not punishing Leo, I said. I have given him the most valuable gift I could possibly give. I put $10,000 into a 529 education savings plan in his name this morning. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. What? She asked, her voice flat. A 529 plan, I repeated, enunciating clearly. It is a tax-advantaged investment account for future education costs. The money is locked. It grows with compound interest until he turns 18. It can only be used for college tuition books or vocational training. But that doesn't help us now, she shrieked. Her voice cracked, revealing the desperation underneath. We need the money for the party. We already invited everyone. We promised Leo the party. Then you should pay for the party, I said. You and Brandon have jobs. You are parents. Parents pay for parties. Grandparents contribute to futures. You can't do this, she yelled. We don't have $5,000 lying around. We spent our liquidity on the down payment for other things. You have to undo it. Take the money out of that stupid fund and transfer it to us. Now I cannot do that. Brittany, I said, my voice hardening. The fund is irrevocable. Even if I wanted to take it back, there would be massive penalties. But I don't want to take it back. For the first time, I know exactly where my money is going. It is going to Leo. Not to a party planner. Not to a car dealership. Not to your closet. It is going to the boy. You are ruining everything, she screamed. You are a selfish, bitter old man. I am going to tell Leo that his grandfather didn't care enough to give him a party. I am going to tell him you ruined his birthday. You can tell him whatever you like, I said. But when he is 18 and looking at a debt-free degree, he will know who actually cared about him. I am going to put Brandon on the phone, she threatened. He can't afford to talk to me right now, I said. He should probably save his minutes for job hunting. What is that supposed to mean? She snapped. It means, Brittany, that the party is over, in every sense of the word. I hung up. I didn't just press the end call button. I placed the phone face down on the table with a sense of finality. My heart was beating a little faster, but it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. It was the rush of a man who finally stood his ground. I picked up my tea again. My hand was steady. $10,000. It was double what they had asked for. But it was safe. It was beyond their reach. They couldn't spend it on sushi dinners or designer handbags. It was a fortress of cash built around my grandson's future, and they didn't have the key. I imagined the scene in their house right now. Brittany throwing her phone. Brandon pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair. They were scrambling. They were realizing that the safety net they had bounced on for a decade had suddenly vanished. They would have to cancel the fancy venue. They would have to have the party in the backyard with homemade cake. It would be a tragedy for their social image, but it would probably be a better party for an 8-year-old boy. But the real storm hadn't even hit them yet. They were panicking about a $5,000 party bill. They had no idea that on Monday morning, the courier would arrive with the notice to quit. They were worried about losing a deposit on a bouncy castle. They didn't know they were about to lose the house itself. I took a deep breath and smelled the old paper of my record sleeves and the fresh scent of the tea. This was what freedom tasted like. It tasted like saying no. I picked up the biography of Teddy Roosevelt again. I turned the page. I had a whole weekend of peace ahead of me before the real war started on Monday. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to the fight. Because this time I knew I was going to win. Saturday arrived with the kind of aggressive sunshine that real estate agents pray for. It was the perfect lighting for a lie. While I was sitting on my porch 5 miles away reading a book and drinking cheap coffee, my son and his wife were hosting the social event of the season in the backyard I had paid for. I wasn't invited, of course. I was the ghost at the feast, the invisible financier, whose existence was necessary for the checks to clear, but whose presence was considered a social liability. But I didn't need to be there to know exactly what was happening. I knew the layout of that house. I knew the acoustics of the patio. And thanks to the security system I had installed and paid the monthly subscription for, I could have watched the whole thing on my iPad. But I didn't watch. I didn't need to see the pixels to know the script. I knew my son. I knew his wife. And I knew that pride always swells to its maximum size right before the puncture. The backyard of the Oak Creek Drive house was designed for envy. That was the instruction Brittany had given the landscape architect 3 years ago. She didn't want a garden. She wanted a statement. The hydrangeas were blue and massive, chemically treated to be perfect. The lawn was manicured to within a millimeter of its life. And in the center of it all stood Brandon, wearing a novelty apron that said, "The Grill Father flipping Wagyu burgers" on a $3,000 Viking grill that he had used exactly twice. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He was laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny, holding a craft beer he didn't actually like, and acting like a man who had conquered the world. Brittany was holding court near the fire pit. She was wearing a white linen dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was surrounded by her squadron of friends, women who all looked vaguely similar, with the same expensive highlights and the same judgmental eyes. There was Tiffany, whose husband was in hedge funds, and Jessica, who ran a boutique that never seemed to sell any clothes. They were sipping mimosas made with the champagne I had bought for New Year's Eve but never got to drink. I can imagine Brittany's voice perfectly. It has a specific pitch when she is bragging, a sort of melodic, breathless quality that is designed to make other people feel small. "We are thinking of expanding the patio next spring," she was saying, gesturing vaguely at the perfectly good flagstone beneath her feet. "Brandon and I feel like the flow is just a bit off. We want to install an outdoor kitchen with a pizza oven. You know, something rustic, but modern. We might have to take out that old oak tree to make room, but honestly, it drops too many leaves anyway." The old oak tree. The one I planted with my late wife 30 years ago. The one Brandon used to climb when he was 6. To Brittany, it was just a debris generator that was blocking her pizza oven. Tiffany nodded sympathetically, taking a sip of her drink. "That sounds amazing, Britt. Renovations are such a headache, though. We just finished the pool house and I thought I was going to lose my mind." "Oh, I know," Brittany laughed, tossing her hair back. "But Brandon is so good at managing the contractors. He is very particular. He demands the best. We are actually thinking about buying a vacation property in Aspen, too. Just something small for the winter ski season. We need a getaway. The stress of managing all these assets is real, you know." She sighed, a heavy, dramatic sigh that was meant to solicit pity for the burden of being so wealthy. Jessica chimed in, leaning forward. "Speaking of stress, where is Brandon's dad? I thought he usually comes to these things." "He is usually hovering." Brittany rolled her eyes. The gesture was practiced. It was a performance of long-suffering patience. "Oh, Douglas." We finally had to set some boundaries. It was getting to be too much. He is sweet, I guess, in his own way. But he is just so needy. He shows up unannounced, he critiques our parenting, he tries to fix things that aren't broken. We had to tell him that we need our space. We are focusing on our nuclear family right now. It is healthier this way. Good for you, Tiffany said. Toxic family members can be such a drain. You have to protect your peace. Exactly, Brittany said, raising her glass. To peace. And to not having to listen to stories about bridge construction for 3 hours. They all laughed. It was a cruel tinkling sound that floated over the fence and into the neighbor's yard. They toasted to my absence. They toasted to the freedom of spending my money. Without having to look at my face, Brandon looked over from the grill and smiled at them. He didn't hear the insult, or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. He was busy living the fantasy. In his mind, he was the king of this castle. He was the provider. He was the man who made all this possible. He had conveniently forgotten that the meat he was cooking, the propane in the tank, and the ground he was standing on were all subsidized by the old man they were mocking. The party was reaching its peak. The music was a curated playlist of soft yacht rock. The smell of expensive beef and charcoal filled the air. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. And then the sound of reality arrived. It wasn't a subtle sound. It was the distinct heavy rumble of a diesel engine. A large white truck with purple and orange lettering pulled up to the curb, blocking the driveway. The air brakes hissed loudly, cutting through the soft melody of the music. A FedEx delivery driver jumped out. He wasn't wearing linen. He was wearing shorts and a uniform soaked in sweat. He walked briskly up the driveway, holding a flat, rigid cardboard envelope, the kind that screams legal documents. Brandon looked up from the grill. He frowned. He wasn't expecting a package. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the gate. He tried to look casual, but there is always a low-level anxiety in people who live beyond their means when an unexpected visitor arrives. He met the driver at the edge of the patio. "Brandon Carter," the driver asked, looking at his handheld scanner. "Yeah, that is me," Brandon said. "Can you keep it down?" "We have guests." "Sign here," the driver said, unbothered by the social atmosphere. "Priority overnight. Signature required." Brandon scribbled his name on the screen. The driver handed him the envelope. It was heavy. It was stiff. And it had a red sticker on it that said urgent. Do not bend. The driver turned and walked away. The truck rumbled again, shifted gears, and drove off, leaving a cloud of exhaust that drifted over the manicured lawn. Brandon stood there holding the envelope. He should have put it inside. He should have waited until the guests left. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. And deep down, fear is even stronger. He looked at the return address. Ross and Associates Attorneys at Law. Sylvia. Brandon's heart must have skipped a beat. He knew Sylvia. He knew she was my lawyer. He probably thought it was the check. He probably thought I had come to my senses, realized I was being petty about the car repair, and sent a cashier's check via lawyer to save face. A smile touched his lips. He thought he had won. He turned his back to the guests, shielding the envelope with his body. He pulled the tab on the side. The cardboard ripped with a sharp zipping sound. He pulled out the documents. There were 3 of them. The first one was not a check. It was a formal letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. At the top in bold capitalized letters were 3 words that changed the atmospheric pressure of the entire afternoon. Notice to quit. Brandon blinked. He read it again. He couldn't process the words. Notice to quit, that was something landlords gave to tenants who didn't pay rent. That was something that happened to poor people. That didn't happen to Brandon Carter, the Vice President of Business Development, the owner of the Viking Grill. He read the first paragraph. Dear Mr. Carter, Please be advised that your status as a resident beneficiary of the property located at 2405 Oak Creek Drive is hereby revoked, effective immediately pursuant to Clause 14B of the Carter Family Trust. You are hereby required to vacate the premises and surrender possession of the property to the trustee Douglas Carter within 30 days of the receipt of this notice. Failure to vacate will result in immediate eviction proceedings. The color began to drain from Brandon's face. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his lips, which turned a pale shade of gray, and then spread to his cheeks. His hands began to shake. The paper rattled in the slight breeze. He quickly flipped to the second document. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a joke. The second document was even worse. Notice of intent to sell real property. This notice serves to inform you that the property is being listed for sale on the open market. A real estate photographer will be arriving on Monday at 9 a.m. to document the interior and exterior of the home. As the current occupant, you are required by law to maintain the property in show-ready condition and allow access to potential buyers with 24 hours notice. Selling. The word hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. We were selling the house. His house. The house he had just told his friends he was planning to expand. The house where he was currently hosting a party to celebrate his own success. He looked at the third document. It was a copy of the promissory note for the kitchen renovation. $40,000. Stamped in red ink across the front was one word: default. Brandon felt the world tilt. The smell of the burgers suddenly made him nauseous. The laughter of the guests sounded distorted, like he was hearing it underwater. He looked around the yard. He saw Tiffany admiring the hydrangeas. He saw Jessica topping off her mimosa. He saw the illusion he had built, and he saw the bulldozer coming to crush it. 30 days. He didn't have 30 days. He didn't have $30. He had maxed out his credit cards. He had zero savings. He had a pregnant wife who expected a vacation home in Aspen, and he was holding a letter telling him he was about to be homeless. Just then, Brittany's voice cut through the fog of his panic. "Babe." Who was that? Brandon jumped. He shoved the papers back into the torn envelope. He jammed the envelope into the deep pocket of his apron. It didn't fit completely. The corner stuck out sharp and threatening against the fabric. He turned around. He tried to smile. It was a grotesque expression. His eyes were wide and terrified, but his mouth was stretched into a rictus of forced casualness. "Oh, just a courier," he stammered. His voice was an octave higher than usual. Brittany walked over to him. She looked annoyed that he had stepped away from the grill. Well, obviously it was a courier, Brandon. "What was it? Is it the contract for the new downtown high-rise? Did you land the deal?" She was giving him an out. She was handing him a lie on a silver platter because she wanted to impress her friends. She wanted him to say yes. She wanted to turn to Tiffany and Jessica and say, "See, my husband is closing million-dollar deals on a Saturday." Brandon looked at her. He looked at the expectant faces of the guests. He looked at the lie he had been living, and he doubled down. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Yeah, that is it. The downtown project. Just needed a signature. Big stuff, very urgent." Brittany beamed. She clapped her hands together. "I told you guys," she squealed, turning back to her friends. "He is unstoppable. We are definitely celebrating tonight. Champagne is on us." The guests cheered. Tiffany raised her glass. To Brandon, to the rainmaker. Brandon nodded weakly. "To me," he whispered. He turned back to the grill. He picked up the spatula. His hand was shaking so badly that he almost dropped it. He stared at the burgers. They were burning. The fat was dripping onto the coals, creating flare-ups of orange flame. He watched the meat char. He felt like he was burning with them. He could feel the envelope pressing against his thigh through the apron. It felt hot. It felt like a radioactive isotope. 30 days. He looked at Brittany, who was laughing at something Jessica said. She had no idea. She was planning pizza ovens and ski trips. She didn't know that the ground beneath her high heels had already been sold. She didn't know that her husband wasn't a rainmaker. He was a squatter. Brandon felt a wave of dizziness. He gripped the handle of the grill to steady himself. He needed a drink. He needed a stiff drink. But he couldn't leave. He was the host. He had to stand there and cook expensive meat for people he didn't like while his entire life disintegrated in his pocket. The sun beat down on him. The heat from the grill blasted his face. He was sweating profusely now, sweat stinging his eyes. "You okay, hun?" Brittany called out. "You look a little flushed." "I am fine," Brandon croaked. Just the heat from the fire." It wasn't the heat. It was the hell I had just invited him into. And the worst part for him wasn't the fear of homelessness. It wasn't the fear of bankruptcy. It was the crushing, suffocating weight of the secret. He had to get through the rest of this party. He had to smile. He had to serve burgers. He had to pretend. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the text message. "We want peace, well, son," I thought, as I turned the page of my book on my quiet porch. "Enjoy your party. Because tomorrow the peace ends and the eviction begins." The FedEx truck was long gone, but the damage was done. The first domino had fallen, and Brandon, standing there in his ridiculous apron, was the only one who could hear the clicking sound of the rest of them coming down. It was just after 11 o'clock at night when the headlights swept across my living room wall. I was sitting in my leather armchair, the house dark except for the small reading lamp illuminating the pages of my book. Outside, a storm had rolled in off the coast, battering the windows with sheets of rain. The thunder was loud, but it wasn't as loud as the engine revving in my driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. I knew the aggressive sound of that engine. I knew the way the car doors slammed, not with the click of a rival, but with the heavy thud of rage. I closed my book. I placed it gently on the side table next to my cold cup of tea. I didn't stand up. I didn't go to the door. I sat there and waited. I wanted them to come to me. I wanted them to cross the threshold of my sanctuary and bring their chaos into the light where I could dissect it. The pounding on the door began seconds later. It wasn't a knock. It was a physical assault on the wood. Bam, bam, bam. "Open the door," it was Brandon's voice. It was cracked and raw, straining against the wind and the rain. "Open the door right now, Dad." I took a deep breath. I smoothed the fabric of my trousers. Then slowly, deliberately, I walked to the entryway. I unlocked the deadbolt. I didn't fling the door open. I turned the handle and pulled it back just enough to reveal them. They looked like a tragedy. Brandon was soaking wet. His expensive dress shirt was plastered to his chest, translucent and sad. His hair, usually styled to perfection, with gel, was dripping water into his eyes. Brittany stood behind him, shivering in her thin linen dress, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, making her look like a weeping doll. They didn't wait for an invitation. Brandon pushed past me, his shoulder colliding with mine hard enough to make me stumble back a step. Brittany followed him, bringing a gust of cold, wet air and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with ozone into my hallway. "You are insane," Brandon shouted. He spun around to face me, water flying from his hair onto my hardwood floor. "You are actually legally insane. Do you know what you did today? Do you have any idea what you did?" I closed the door calmly. I locked the deadbolt again. The click was loud in the sudden silence of the hallway. "I know exactly what I did," I said. My voice was low. It was the voice of the engineer explaining why a bridge had to be closed for safety reasons. I sent a legal notice. I assume you received it. Received it! Brittany shrieked. She stepped out from behind Brandon. Her eyes were wild. Received it! A FedEx driver handed it to my husband in the middle of a party. In front of everyone. In front of Tiffany. In front of Jessica. We were humiliated. Douglas, humiliated. She was shaking, but not from the cold. She was shaking with the indignation of a queen who had been asked to pay for her own meal. We had to kick everyone out, Brandon yelled, pacing back and forth in the entryway. His wet shoes squeaked on the floor. We had to make up a lie that I was sick. Do you know how embarrassing that is? I looked like an idiot. And then I opened the envelope and see this. This garbage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled, rain-soaked documents. He threw them at me. They fluttered to the floor, wet and pathetic. Notice to quit, he spat the words out. Are you kidding me? You can't evict us, Dad. We are family. You can't treat us like tenants. I looked down at the papers on the floor. I didn't pick them up. I am treating you exactly like tenants, I said, because that is what you are. Bad tenants. Tenants who destroy property, disrespect the landlord, and refuse to pay rent. It is our house, Brittany screamed. She marched up to me, getting right in my face. I could see the veins throbbing in her neck. How dare you call yourself the landlord? We live there. We made that house a home. I painted the nursery. I chose the backsplash in the kitchen. I planted the hydrangeas that makes it ours. I looked at her. I looked at the delusion in her eyes. She genuinely believed that picking out a color at a hardware store transferred legal ownership of $1 million asset. Brittany, I said, keeping my hands clasped behind my back. Painting a wall does not give you the deed. Choosing a backsplash does not sign the mortgage. You have lived there for 5 years, rent-free. That was a gift, a privilege, and today the privilege expired. You can't do this, Brandon interrupted, his voice shaking. The law won't let you. We have rights. We have squatters' rights or occupancy rights. You can't just throw a family on the street. I almost laughed. Squatters' rights. He was grasping at legal terms he had heard on television. I suggest you read the documents again, I said. I didn't write them. Sylvia Ross wrote them. And you know Sylvia. She doesn't make mistakes. The house is owned by the Carter Family Trust. I am the sole trustee. You are listed as resident beneficiaries. And Clause 14b states clearly that the trustee can revoke residency at any time if the beneficiary's conduct is deemed detrimental to the estate. Detrimental to the estate, Brandon shouted. What did we do? What did we possibly do that is detrimental? We are raising your grandson. We are living normal lives. You demanded money. I didn't owe you, I said. You disrespected me in my own home. You told me to stay away. You told me you wanted peace. Well, Brandon, this is what peace looks like. Peace is me protecting the estate from people who bleed it dry. This is about the car, isn't it? Brittany hissed. She wiped the mascara from her cheek with the back of her hand. This is all because Brandon asked you to pay for the transmission. My God, you are petty. You are a petty, vindictive old man. You are doing this to teach us a lesson. Fine message received. We will pay for the stupid car. Just call the lawyers and cancel the eviction. She looked at me expectantly. She thought it was a negotiation. She thought she could throw a few $1,000s at the problem and make it go away just like they always did. It is not about the car, I said. The car was just the trigger. The gun has been loaded for years. I walked past them into the living room. I needed space. The smell of their entitlement was suffocating me. Where are you going? Brandon yelled, following me. Don't walk away from me. We are not done. I turned around near the fireplace. We are done, Brandon. The notice gives you 30 days. You have 29 left. I suggest you spend less time screaming in my hallway and more time looking for an apartment. You are selling it, he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. I saw the second notice. You are actually selling the house. Yes, I said. The photographer comes on Monday. I expect the house to be clean. If it is not, I will hire a cleaning crew and deduct the cost from the final accounting of the trust. You can't sell it, he pleaded. We were going to expand the patio. We were going to build a pizza oven. It is our dream house, Dad. Then you should have bought it, I said coldly. But you didn't buy it. I did. I bought it with money I earned working 60-hour weeks while you were playing video games in college. I bought it to give you a head start, not a free ride. We added value, Brittany shouted from the hallway. We renovated the kitchen. That marble countertop cost $12,000. We put our own money into that. Your own money, I asked. Or the $40,000 I lent you 2 years ago, the loan you never paid back. She went silent. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That is right, I continued. I remember the loan. I remember the promissory note. And guess what that is called in too? You owe me $40,000 plus interest. If the house sells for a profit, I might be generous and deduct your debt from the proceeds. But don't expect a check. You are underwater, Brittany. You just haven't realized you are drowning yet. Brandon sank onto the sofa. My leather sofa. He put his head in his wet hands. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he broke a window playing baseball expecting me to fix it. But I wasn't the fixer anymore. I was the demolition crew. Dad, please, he wept. His shoulders shook. You can't do this to Leo. He loves his room. He loves that house. If we have to move, he will have to change schools. He will lose his friends. Do you want to hurt your grandson? Is that what you want? The weaponization of the child. I knew it was coming. It was their last resort. The human shield. Leo will be fine, I said, my voice steady, though my heart ached at the mention of his name. Leo is resilient. What Leo needs is not a fancy room or a private school he only attends because his grandfather pays for it. What Leo needs is to see his father stand on his own 2 feet. He needs to see his parents struggle and survive instead of just taking and demanding. You are ruining his life, Brittany screamed. She rushed into the room and stood over Brandon, protecting him. You are a monster. You are jealous because we are young and happy, and you are old and alone. That is what this is. You want us to be miserable like you. I looked at them. Young and happy, they were miserable. They were drowning in debt, keeping up appearances for people who didn't care about them, and terrified of a future they hadn't prepared for. I am not miserable, Brittany, I said. I am free. And soon you will be free too, free of the burden of a house you can't afford. Free of the delusion that you are wealthy. It will be hard. It will be painful. But it might just save you. Save us, Brandon looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. You are destroying us. I will lose my job. If I get evicted, if I have a judgment against me. My company does background checks, Dad. I work in finance construction. I can't have a lien on my record. Then you better start packing, I said. Because the clock is ticking. He stood up. The sadness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It was the anger of the entitled man who realizes the world doesn't obey him. Fine, he said. You want a war, you got one. We won't leave. We will fight the eviction. We will squat. We will drag this out in court for months. It takes 6 months to evict a family in this state, Dad. I looked it up. And in the meantime, we won't let you see Leo. Not once. You will never see him again. I nodded slowly. I expected this. You can try, I said. But remember who pays for the lawyers. I have Sylvia Ross. I have the resources to fight this for 10 years. Can you afford a retainer? Can you afford court fees? Or will you have to ask Tiffany and Jessica for a loan? Brandon flinched. And as for Leo, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If you use that boy as a pawn, if you try to keep him from me, I will petition the court for grandparents' rights. And I will show the judge the financial records. I will show them the instability. I will show them that you are bankrupt and facing homelessness. Who do you think the court will side with, the solvent grandfather with a trust fund, or the unemployed father with a maxed-out credit card? Unemployed, Brandon frowned. I am not unemployed. I looked at him with genuine pity. Check your email on Monday morning, son. What? What did you do? He stepped closer, panic rising in his voice again. I am the silent partner, Brandon, I said. The investor group that backs your firm, that is me. That is my capital. I pulled my funding yesterday. The restructuring starts Monday. He stared at me. The horror was total. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground open up and swallow him whole. You fired me. I didn't fire you, I said. I just stopped paying for your job. There is a difference. If you are as good as you say you are, if you are a real rainmaker, another company will snap you up in a heartbeat. Right. He didn't answer. He knew the truth. He knew he was mediocre. He knew he only had the job because I made a phone call 5 years ago. Get out, I said. They didn't move. Get out of my house, I roared. It was the first time I raised my voice. The sound bounced off the walls, startling them. Brittany grabbed Brandon's arm. Come on, she said, her voice trembling. Let's go. He is crazy. He is actually crazy. We will call a lawyer in the morning. We will sue him for everything. She pulled him toward the door. Brandon stumbled, looking back at me over his shoulder. He looked like a stranger. I hate you, he whispered. I know, I said. They walked out into the rain. The door didn't slam this time. It didn't catch in the wind. I walked over and pushed it shut. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was pounding in my chest like a sledgehammer. My hands were shaking. I wasn't made for this. I wasn't a fighter. I was a builder. I wanted to fix things, not break them. But sometimes, to fix a foundation that is rotten to the core, you have to tear the whole house down. I turned off the porch light. I went back to my chair. The tea was cold. The book lay open to the same page. The silence returned to the house, but it felt different now. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the morning. It was the heavy, charged silence of a battlefield after the first volley of cannons has been fired. They were gone. But the war had just begun. I picked up my tea and took a sip. It was bitter. Good, I whispered to the empty room. I sat there in the dark, listening to the rain wash away the tire tracks in the driveway. While 5 miles away, my son and his wife were driving back to a house that wasn't theirs, to sleep in a bed they didn't own, waking up to a future they never saw coming. Monday was going to be a very long day. Monday morning arrived like a gavel coming down on a judge's bench. It was sharp, definitive, and it demanded order. While I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and watching the rain streak against the window, 2 simultaneous disasters were unfolding 5 miles apart. I wasn't there to witness them, but I knew the schedule. I had written the schedule. At 8:55 a.m. on Oak Creek Drive, Brittany was frantically scrubbing a wine stain off the white marble countertop. She looked like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She was wearing her silk pajamas, her hair was in a messy bun, and she was muttering to herself. The house was supposed to be a fortress of her status, but now it felt like a prison cell that was shrinking by the minute. She had ignored the email from the real estate agency. She had deleted the voicemail from the photographer. She had convinced herself that if she simply didn't acknowledge the appointment, it wouldn't happen. She thought she could barricade herself inside her own denial. But denial doesn't work on electronic locks. At exactly 9 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman in a sharp navy blazer stepped out. This was not just any real estate agent. This was Courtney, a woman Brittany had known since college. A woman Brittany had spent the last 5 years trying to outshine. A woman who had been the runner-up for homecoming queen when Brittany took the crown. And now Courtney held the master key. Brittany froze when she saw Courtney through the kitchen window. She dropped the sponge. She didn't move. She just watched as Courtney walked up the path, followed by a photographer carrying a tripod and a heavy camera bag. The doorbell rang. It echoed through the house like a summons. Brittany didn't answer. She backed away from the door, holding her breath. Then came the sound of the keypad beep. Beep, 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 click. The front door swung open. "Hello," Courtney's voice floated in cheerful and professional. "Listing agent. We have a scheduled appointment for photography." Brittany rushed into the hallway, pulling her robe tight around her. "You can't come in," she shrieked. "Get out! This is private property." Courtney stopped. She looked Brittany up and down, taking in the stained pajamas, the frantic eyes, the smell of bleach and panic. A slow, pitying smile spread across her face. "Brittany," she said smoothly, "I didn't know you were home. The trustee, Mr. Carter, said the house would be vacant for the shoot. But since you are here, maybe you can move that pile of laundry off the sofa. We need the wide-angle shot." While Brittany was staring into the face of her high school rival across the city inside the glass-walled headquarters of Apex Construction, Brandon was walking toward the elevator. He looked terrible. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had cut himself shaving. But he was wearing his best suit. He was trying to project an image of stability. He told himself that the weekend was just a nightmare. He told himself that his father wouldn't actually go through with it. His father was bluffing. His father always caved. Brandon pressed the button for the 14th floor. He checked his reflection in the polished metal doors. He straightened his tie. "I am the rainmaker," he whispered to himself. "I am essential." The elevator dinged. He stepped out into the bustling office. He expected the usual greeting from the receptionist. He expected his team to be waiting for him with coffee and reports. Instead, the receptionist looked down at her desk as he passed. The office was quiet. Too quiet. People were typing, but their eyes were darting toward him and then quickly away. It was the atmosphere of a funeral. Brandon walked to his office. He reached for the handle. It was locked. He frowned. He tapped his keycard against the reader. The light flashed red. Denied. He tapped it again. Red. Denied. "Hey, Sarah," he called out to his assistant who was sitting 10 feet away. "My card is demagnetized. Can you let me in?" Sarah didn't stand up. She looked at him with an expression of pure discomfort. "I can't, Brandon," she whispered. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you. In the boardroom. Now." Back at the house, the invasion was in full swing. The photographer was setting up lights in the living room, moving Brittany's carefully curated throw pillows as if they were trash. Flash bulbs were popping, capturing every corner of the space she claimed was hers. Brittany stood in the kitchen, cornered by Courtney. "You can't do this, Courtney," Brittany hissed. "We are not selling. My father-in-law is having a mental health crisis. He is confused. We are going to clear this up with the lawyers today. You need to leave." Courtney opened a folder she was holding. She pulled out a sheet of paper. "It doesn't look like confusion to me, Britt," Courtney said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "I have a signed listing agreement from the title holder, Douglas Carter, trustee, and I have a copy of the notice to quit that was served to you on Saturday." She looked up, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "Honestly, it is kind of sad," she continued. "Everyone in our circle thought you guys owned this place. You always talked about it like it was yours. My kitchen, my garden. But you were just occupants. That must be so embarrassing for you. It is ours, Brittany snapped. We are the beneficiaries, were Courtney corrected. Past tense. The listing says trustee sale, vacant possession. That means you are leaving. Courtney looked around the kitchen. She ran a finger along the marble island. You know the market is tough right now, she said conversationally. But since this is a distress sale, we priced it aggressively. I actually have a client coming to see it in 20 minutes. An investor. He is looking for a rental property. Maybe you guys could rent it back from him. Although checking your credit, probably not. Brittany felt tears pricking her eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to slap the smug look off Courtney's face. But she couldn't. Because Courtney was right. Courtney had the paperwork. Courtney had the power. And Brittany was just a woman in pajamas standing in a house that was being sold out from under her. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom on the 14th floor, the air conditioning was humming, but Brandon was sweating. He sat at the long mahogany table. At the head sat Mr. Sterling, the CEO. Sterling was a man of few words and even fewer emotions. He was looking at a file in front of him. Brandon Sterling said, not looking up, "We are making some structural changes to the firm." Brandon let out a nervous laugh. Structural changes. That sounds ominous. But hey, I have some great news about the downtown project. I think I can squeeze another 5% margin out of the subcontractors. Sterling finally looked up. His eyes were cold. You are not listening, Brandon. We are restructuring. Specifically, we are liquidating your position. Brandon froze. His smile faltered. Liquidating? What do you mean I am the VP of Business Development? You can't liquidate me. I bring in the deals. I am the face of this company. You were the face of a specific capital stream, Sterling said. He slid a piece of paper across the table. Brandon looked at it. It was a withdrawal notice from a private equity fund. The fund that had injected $2 million into the company 5 years ago. The fund that covered the payroll for the entire expansion division. We received this on Saturday, Sterling explained. Our primary silent investor has invoked his right to withdraw capital due to loss of confidence in management. Specifically, loss of confidence in you. In me, Brandon stammered. Who is the investor? I will talk to them. I can fix this. I can charm anyone. Who is it? Is it the group from New York? Sterling shook his head. He turned the last page of the document around so Brandon could see the signature at the bottom. It wasn't a corporate stamp. It was a handwritten signature in black ink. A signature Brandon had seen on his report cards, on his college tuition checks, on his car insurance forms. Douglas Carter. Brandon stared at the name. The letters seemed to swim before his eyes. My dad, he whispered. My dad is the investor. He is the majority shareholder of the shell company that backs us, yes, Sterling said. He stipulated 5 years ago that his investment was contingent on your employment. He wanted to give you a chance to prove yourself. And now Brandon asked, his voice barely audible. Sterling closed the file. Now he says the experiment is over. He pulled his funding, Brandon, effective immediately. And without that capital, we cannot support your salary, your expense account, or your department. But I am good at this job, Brandon protested, standing up. I built relationships. Sterling sighed. He took off his glasses and cleaned them. Let's be honest, Brandon. You spent money. You took clients to expensive dinners. You played golf, but the actual engineering, the actual closing that was done by the team, you were a figurehead paid for by your father. And now the check has bounced. Sterling pressed a button on the intercom. Security, please come to the boardroom. Brandon felt his legs give way. He sat back down heavily. He fired me, he murmured. My own father fired me. He didn't fire you, Sterling corrected. He just stopped paying us to keep you. Back on Oak Creek Drive, the doorbell rang again. Courtney checked her watch. Right on time, she chirped. That will be the investor. Brittany, you might want to go upstairs and hide. It is not a good look for the sellers to be present, especially dressed like that. Brittany stood her ground for a second, trembling with rage. Get out, she whispered. Courtney ignored her. She walked to the door and opened it wide. Welcome, come on in. The lighting is fantastic right now. A man walked in. He was wearing a cheap suit and carrying a clipboard. He looked around the entryway with a critical eye. Nice floors, the man said. Are they hardwood or laminate? They are imported oak. Brittany screamed from the kitchen. She couldn't help herself. The man looked at her startled. Oh, I thought the unit was vacant. It will be soon, Courtney assured him. Just ignore her. She is leaving. Brittany watched them walk into the living room. Courtney was pointing out the fireplace, the high ceilings, the crown molding. She was selling Brittany's life piece by piece to a stranger who was looking at it like a piece of meat. And then the ultimate violation happened. Let's look at the master bedroom, Courtney said, leading the man toward the stairs. It has a walk-in closet that is to die for. No, Brittany yelled, running to the bottom of the stairs. You can't go up there. My underwear is on the floor. My bed is unmade. Courtney stopped on the third step. She looked down at Brittany. Her expression wasn't malicious anymore. It was cold. It was the face of reality. Then you should have cleaned it up, Courtney said. But since you didn't, we are going to look anyway. Because you don't get to dictate the terms anymore, Brittany. You are just a guest who overstayed her welcome. She turned and walked up the stairs. The man followed her. Brittany heard their footsteps on the carpet. She heard the door to her sanctuary creak open. She heard the man say, Wow, it smells a bit musty in here, doesn't it? Brittany collapsed onto the bottom step. She buried her face in her knees. She listened to the camera shutter clicking upstairs, capturing the mess of her life for the whole world to see on the internet. At the exact same moment, 2 security guards walked into the boardroom at Apex Construction. Mr. Carter, one of them said, holding out a cardboard box. We have cleared your desk. Personal items only. Company laptop and phone have been retained. Brandon looked at the box. It was small. Inside there was a framed photo of him and Brittany in Aspen. A stress ball. A half-empty bottle of cologne. 5 years of his career reduced to a box that weighed less than 5 pounds. You can't do this, Brandon said weakly. I need to call my dad. You can call him from the lobby, Sterling said, standing up. Please escort Mr. Carter out of the building and take his access badge. One guard stepped forward and unclipped the badge from Brandon's belt. It was a swift, professional motion. Brandon felt a tug at his waist, and then he was untethered. He was no longer vice president. He was just a guy in a suit with a box. He stood up. He walked to the door. He looked back at Sterling. Tell him he is ruining my life. Sterling looked at his paperwork. He didn't look up. I think that is the message he sent you, Brandon. Brandon walked out into the hallway. The walk to the elevator felt like a death march. People were watching. They whispered. They knew. The office grapevine traveled faster than light. The prince had fallen. The safety net was gone. The elevator ride down took 30 seconds. 30 seconds to descend 14 floors. 30 seconds to go from the top of the world to the street. When the doors opened in the lobby, the glare of the outside world hit him. It was still raining. He didn't have an umbrella. He walked out onto the sidewalk. The rain soaked his suit immediately. It ruined his hair. It ran down his neck. He stood on the corner clutching his cardboard box. He pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. I was sitting in my kitchen. I saw the name Brandon flash on the screen. I didn't answer. I let it ring. I watched the rain fall on my garden. I thought about the first time I taught Brandon to ride a bike. I let go of the seat and he wobbled. He was terrified. He screamed for me to hold him. But I knew that if I held him, he would never learn to balance. So I watched him fall. He scraped his knee. He cried. But the next day, he rode. This was a much harder fall, and the scrape would be much deeper. The phone stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again. This time, it was Brittany. I didn't answer that either. I imagined them. Brandon on the street corner, wet and fired. Brittany on the stairs, humiliated and exposed. The two halves of their perfect world had shattered simultaneously. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still warm. I picked up my pen and my notepad. I had a list of things to do. Cancel the car insurance. Cancel the country club membership. I drew a line through Apex Investment. I drew a line through house showing. 2 down, 3 to go. And I wasn't doing this out of hate. I was doing it out of necessity. I was performing surgery, and surgery always involves blood. I looked at the phone one last time. "Welcome to the real world, kids," I whispered. Then I turned off the ringer, picked up my book, and went back to reading. The silence in my house was absolute, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice. The conference room at Ross & Associates was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I had helped build. But inside the room, the atmosphere was airless. The air conditioning hummed with a low, menacing vibration. The mahogany table was long and polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the distorted faces of the people sitting around it. On one side sat my son Brandon and his wife Brittany. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 48 hours. Brandon was wearing a suit that looked slightly wrinkled. The collar of his shirt unbuttoned, his tie loose. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly on the table, the knuckles white. Brittany was wearing oversized sunglasses even though we were indoors. She sat with her arms crossed, radiating a mixture of fury and terror. Next to them sat their lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson. I knew Henderson by reputation. He was a strip mall attorney who specialized in personal injury and loud, empty threats. He was cheap, which told me everything I needed to know about their current financial situation. On the other side sat Sylvia Ross and me. Sylvia was the picture of lethal elegance. She had a single thick black binder in front of her. She didn't open it. She just rested her hand on it, calm and possessive. I sat next to her, silent, watching the storm clouds gather over the city skyline. Henderson cleared his throat. It was a nervous sound. "Let's not waste time," he said, trying to project confidence. "My clients are victims of a sudden and malicious eviction attempt. Mr. Carter here, despite being the biological father, has acted with extreme prejudice. We are claiming constructive trust. We are claiming equitable interest. Brandon and Brittany have lived in that house for 5 years. They have treated it as their own. They have poured their blood, sweat, and tears into that property. You cannot simply throw them out because of a family squabble." He leaned back, looking satisfied with his opening statement. Sylvia didn't blink. She didn't look at Henderson. She looked at Brandon. "Blood, sweat, and tears," she repeated softly. "That is a poetic phrase, Mr. Henderson. But in a court of law, we prefer receipts." She opened the black binder. The snap of the metal rings echoed in the room like a gunshot. Brittany took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "We renovated the kitchen," she blurted out, her voice shrill. "I told you. We put in marble. We landscaped the garden. That adds value, that makes us partners in the property." Sylvia turned the first page of the binder. She ran her finger down a column of figures. "Let's talk about value," she said. "And let's talk about who paid for it." She pulled out a spreadsheet. It was color-coded. It was detailed. It was the autopsy of their lifestyle. Exhibit A, Sylvia said, sliding a copy of the spreadsheet across the table toward Henderson. This is a comprehensive ledger of all household expenses for the property on Oak Creek Drive for the last 60 months. Henderson picked up the paper. He frowned. Sylvia began to read. Her voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a machine. Mortgage payments, principal and interest. $5,200 per month. Paid by Douglas Carter. Total for 5 years. $312,000. She looked up. Did you pay any of that, Brandon? Brandon shook his head slightly. No. Property taxes, Sylvia continued. State and local assessments. Average of $12,000 per year. Paid by Douglas Carter. Total for 5 years, $60,000. Brittany shifted in her seat. That is normal. Parents help their children, Sylvia ignored her. Homeowners insurance, flood insurance, earthquake insurance, paid by Douglas Carter. Total $18,000. She turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. Maintenance and repairs, Sylvia read. New HVAC system installed in 2021. Cost $14,000. Paid by Douglas Carter. Roof repair in 2022. Cost $8,000. Paid by Douglas Carter. Weekly landscaping service. Monthly pool cleaning service. Pest control. Security system monitoring, all paid by Douglas Carter. She paused and looked directly at Brittany. You mentioned the garden, Brittany. The hydrangeas. According to this invoice from Greenleaf Landscaping, the installation cost was $3,000. The check was signed by Douglas Carter. You didn't plant them. You pointed at a catalog, and my client wrote a check. Brittany's face flushed a deep, ugly red. But I designed it, she stammered. I chose the colors. That is intellectual property. Sylvia didn't even dignify that with a response. She turned another page. Now let's address the sweat equity claim regarding the kitchen renovation. You claim you spent $12,000 on marble countertops. Yes, Brittany cried, seizing on this. We paid for that. From our joint account, I have the bank statement, Sylvia nodded. I am sure you do, but let's look at the source of those funds. She pulled out the promissory note, the one with the red default stamp. 2 weeks before the kitchen renovation began, Sylvia said, holding up the document, Douglas Carter transferred $40,000 to your joint account. The memo line on the check reads, Home Improvement Loan. This document signed by both of you agrees to repay the principal plus 3% interest upon demand. She dropped the paper onto the table. So, Sylvia concluded you used $12,000 of my client's money to install countertops in my client's house. You pocketed the remaining $28,000, presumably for lifestyle expenses, and you never paid back a cent. That isn't equity, Brittany. That is embezzlement. Henderson looked at the documents. He looked at his clients. He was beginning to realize he had walked into a slaughterhouse. Okay, look, Henderson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Maybe the numbers are complicated. But there is an emotional component here. You are evicting a family with a young child. A judge is going to look at that and see a grandfather acting out of spite. We can argue unnecessary cruelty. We can argue that you created an expectation of permanent housing. I leaned forward. I placed my hands on the table. Expectation, I said. That is the word, isn't it? You expected it. You felt entitled to it. Brandon looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. Dad, stop. Please, we get it. You made your point. We are broke, okay? We are drowning. I lost my job. We have nothing. Just let us stay for a few months until I find work. Please. For Leo. For a second, I felt a twinge in my chest. He was my son. He was hurting. But then I remembered the text message. We want peace. I remembered the invoice for the transmission. I remembered the way they looked at me at the party like I was a wallet with legs. Sylvia cut in before I could speak. We are not here to discuss a lease extension, she said coldly. We are here to discuss the counterclaim. Counterclaim? Henderson asked. What counterclaim? Sylvia smiled. It was a shark's smile. Unjust enrichment, she said. She flipped to the back of the binder. She pulled out a final spreadsheet. This one had a single large number at the bottom circled in red. Since you are claiming that you were not guests, but rather tenants with rights, Sylvia explained, then we must apply the laws of tenancy, and tenants pay rent. She slid the paper across the table. The fair market rental value of a 4-bedroom home on Oak Creek Drive is approximately $3,000 a month. That is a conservative estimate. Since there was no formal lease agreement, and you are now claiming adverse possession rights, we are retroactively billing you for the use of the facility. Brandon's mouth fell open. You are charging us rent. For the past 5 years, Sylvia nodded. 5 years, 60 months, at $3,000 a month. That comes to $180,000. She tapped the paper. Plus the $40,000 loan, plus the accrued interest, plus the legal fees for this eviction. She looked at Henderson. The total debt your clients currently owe to the Carter estate is $235,400. The room went dead silent. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $235,000. It was a fortune. It was a life sentence for a couple who couldn't even pay for a birthday party. Brittany started to hyperventilate. She clutched her chest. You can't do that. We don't have that kind of money. We will be bankrupt. Sylvia closed the binder. The sound was final. Then I suggest you accept our settlement offer, she said. Settlement? Henderson asked, his voice weak. What settlement? Sylvia slid a single thin piece of paper across the table. Mutual release and voluntary surrender, she said. Here are the terms. 1. You vacate the property within 7 days, not 30. 7. 2. You leave the property in broom-swept condition. No damages. If you take so much as a light bulb, we sue. 3. You sign a waiver acknowledging that you have no claim, financial or otherwise, to the property or the estate. And in exchange, Henderson asked. In exchange, Sylvia said, Douglas Carter will forgive the debt. He will write off the $180,000 in back rent. He will write off the $40,000 loan. He will let you walk away with clean credit, zero debt to him, and the clothes on your backs. She leaned forward. But this offer expires when you walk out that door. If you go to court, if you file one single motion to delay the eviction, we withdraw the offer. We will pursue the full amount. We will garnish your future wages. We will place liens on any future assets. We will make sure that every dollar you earn for the next 20 years goes to paying back your father. She looked at Brandon. Do you want a fresh start, Brandon, or do you want to be an indentured servant to your own arrogance? Brandon looked at the paper. He looked at the spreadsheet with the staggering debt. He looked at Brittany, who was sobbing quietly into her hands. He realized finally that he wasn't playing a game. He was in a war against a superior force. He had brought a water pistol to a nuclear standoff. He reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Dad, he whispered. He looked at me one last time. He wanted me to stop him. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to say, just kidding, son. Here is a check. I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. Sign it. Brandon, I said. It is the most expensive autograph you will ever give, but it is cheaper than the alternative. He signed. He signed away his claim to the house. He signed away his pride. He signed away the illusion he had lived in for 5 years. Brittany signed next. She didn't read it. She just scribbled her name, tears falling onto the paper, smearing the ink. Sylvia took the document back. She checked the signatures. She nodded. "Done," she said. "You have 7 days. The keys must be on the kitchen counter by noon next Monday. The locks will be changed at 12:01. Brandon stood up. He looked like a ghost. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw respect in his eyes. It was the terrified respect of a soldier who had just seen the general call in an airstrike. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say good luck. "I will see you when I see you," I said. They walked out of the conference room. Henderson trailed behind them, looking like a man who just wanted to go home and rethink his career choices. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned to the room. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was peaceful. Sylvia let out a long breath. She opened the binder and took out the spreadsheet. She ripped it in half. "You know, we couldn't have actually collected that rent, right?" she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Without a written lease, a judge might have thrown it out. It was a bluff, huh?" I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. A single ray of sunlight was hitting the building across the street. "I know," I said, "but they didn't know." And that is the difference between those who build the world and those who just live in it. We know how the structure works. I turned back to her. "Send the photographer back, Sylvia. Tell him the house will be empty on Monday. And tell him to get a good shot of the kitchen. I hear the marble countertops are expensive." I walked out of the office. I took the elevator down. I stepped out onto the street. The air was fresh and clean after the storm. I took a deep breath. I didn't have a son to support anymore. I didn't have a mortgage to pay. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was entirely, completely free. I walked to my car. I had a bookshelf to finish sanding. And after that, maybe I would take a trip. Maybe I would go to Aspen. I heard it was nice this time of year, and I could certainly afford it. The demise of my son's marriage did not happen in a courtroom. It happened in the driveway of the house on Oak Creek Drive exactly 48 hours after they signed the settlement papers. I wasn't there to see it, but the neighbors talk. In a quiet suburb, a shouting match on the front lawn is better than cable television. Mrs. Higgins across the street told me later that she had never seen a woman pack a Louis Vuitton suitcase with such violence. They say that money can't buy happiness, but the lack of it certainly clarifies your priorities. For 5 years, Brandon and Brittany had been united by a shared love of spending my money. They were partners in consumption. But when the credit line was cut, the partnership dissolved instantly. It turns out their vows should have said for richer or for richer, because poorer was definitely a deal breaker. The breakdown started the moment they walked out of Sylvia's office. According to the court filings that would come later, the car ride home was silent, until Brittany screamed that Brandon had tricked her. She yelled that she had married a provider, not a loser who gets fired by his own father. She accused him of fraud. She accused him of wasting her prime years. She didn't mourn the loss of their home or the trauma to their son. She mourned her social standing. She mourned the loss of the Aspen trip. By Wednesday, the moving trucks had arrived. But they weren't moving together. Brittany had called her parents. They lived in a modest house 3 states away, people she had largely ignored since she married Brandon. But now they were her escape hatch. She loaded her car with everything that could be sold. She took the silver. She took the artwork. She took the jewelry I had given her for anniversaries. She didn't pack Brandon's things. She didn't pack Leo's toys. She packed her own survival kit. The confrontation in the driveway was the finale. Brandon was standing by the trunk of the car, pleading with her. He was trying to hold her hand. He was crying. He was asking her how they were going to get through this together. She laughed in his face. It was a cold, sharp sound that carried across the lawn. Together she shouted, "There is no together, Brandon. You are drowning, and I am not going to let you pull me down with you. You have nothing. No job, no house, no inheritance. You are a sinking ship." She got into her car. She didn't look back at the house she had fought so hard to keep. She didn't look at the husband she had promised to love. She just put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the pavement. She filed for divorce the next morning. She cited irreconcilable differences, but the real reason was simple math. 0 divided by 2 is still 0. She wanted custody of Leo, not because she wanted to be a full-time mother, but because she knew child support was the only revenue stream Brandon might still have. She didn't realize yet that 40% of an unemployment check wouldn't buy much champagne. Brandon was left standing in the driveway of an empty house. The silence that followed her departure must have been deafening. For the first time in his life, there was no one to blame. There was no one to yell at. There was just the reality of his own mediocrity staring back at him. He spent the next 2 days moving his things into a storage unit. He didn't have much. Without Brittany's decorations and my furniture, his life fit into the back of his rental car. On Monday at noon, exactly as Sylvia had demanded, he left the keys on the kitchen counter. He walked out of the house on Oak Creek Drive. He locked the door behind him. He got into his car and drove away. But he didn't go to a new apartment. He couldn't get approved for a lease. With no job, no savings, and a credit score that was in freefall, he was radioactive to landlords. He checked into the Starlight Motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where they charge by the week, and the towels are thin enough to read a newspaper through. The sign outside advertised color TV and free ice as if those were luxuries. I drove past it one evening just to see. I saw his car parked in front of room 114. It was a stark contrast to the luxury SUV he used to drive. It was a mid-sized sedan dented on the bumper filled with fast food wrappers. Brandon sat inside that room for days. He was paralyzed. He lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the sound of trucks rumbling down the highway. He was experiencing the withdrawal symptoms of privilege. For 32 years, he had been insulated from consequence. Now, consequence was his roommate. He applied for jobs, but it was half-hearted. He was still waiting for the rescue. He checked his phone every hour, expecting a text from me. He expected me to say that the lesson was over, that he had suffered enough, and that I had rented him a nice condo downtown. But the phone never buzzed. Then came the final indignity. It was a Tuesday night, 2 weeks after the eviction. Brandon had fallen behind on the payments for his own car, the one purchase he had actually made himself, although he had used my co-signature to get the loan. When I cut him off, I also removed myself as the guarantor. The bank didn't waste time. He was sleeping when the tow truck arrived. The flashing orange lights cut through the thin curtains of room 114. He ran out in his boxer shorts, screaming. He tried to stop the driver. He tried to explain that he was Brandon Carter, a vice president, a man of substance. The driver didn't care. He hooked up the car. He lifted it into the air. Brandon stood in the parking lot of the motel, barefoot on the dirty asphalt, watching his last connection to the civilized world being dragged away. He looked small. He looked broken. The other motel guests watched from their windows, smoking cigarettes, unimpressed. To them, it was just another Tuesday. He walked back into his room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. He didn't see the rainmaker anymore. He didn't see the grill father. He saw a man who had nothing but the change in his pocket and a box of cold pizza. That night, he hit the bottom. There is a specific sound a man makes when he breaks. It isn't a scream. It is a sob that comes from the gut, a sound of total absolute surrender. Brandon wept. He wept for his wife who had never really loved him. He wept for his house. He wept for the father he had taken for granted. He reached for his phone. He dialed my number. I was awake. I saw the call coming in. I let it ring. It wasn't cruelty. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I wanted to pick up. I wanted to drive down there and pay the motel bill and buy him a new car. I wanted to stop his pain, but I knew that if I did, the pain would be wasted. If I saved him now, he would never save himself. He needed to sit in that darkness. He needed to know that he could survive it. The ringing stopped. He didn't call back. Instead, he did something I didn't expect. The next morning, Brandon put on his only remaining clean suit. He walked out of the motel. He walked 3 miles to the nearest bus stop. He didn't go to a construction firm. He didn't go to an office building. He walked into a Home Depot. I found out later from an old friend who works there. Brandon walked up to the manager. He didn't ask for a management position. He didn't hand over a resume printed on thick, bonded paper. He looked the manager in the eye and said, "I need a job. I will load lumber. I will mix paint. I will clean the floors. I just need to work." The manager looked at his suit, looked at his desperate eyes, and handed him an application. Brandon sat on a bucket in the lumber aisle and filled it out. When he came to the section for emergency contact, he hesitated. His pen hovered over the paper. Then he left it blank. He was finally starting to understand. He was alone, and for the first time in his life, that was exactly what he needed to be. The fall had been brutal. He had lost his wife, his home, his car, and his dignity. But as he stood there in the smell of sawdust and cut wood, he was about to find something he had never owned before: his own spine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the eviction, when my son came back to the house he once thought he would inherit. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, violent bursts of blue against the green leaves, completely indifferent to the human drama that had played out around them. I was on the porch, sanding the final corner of Leo's bookshelf. It was finished now, sturdy, reliable, ready to hold weight. I saw him walking up the driveway. He didn't have a car. He was walking from the bus stop a mile away. He looked thinner. His suit was gone, replaced by a pair of jeans I hadn't seen in a decade and a faded polo shirt. He walked with a slight limp, maybe from a blister, maybe from the weight of his own shame. He didn't look like the vice president of business development anymore. He looked like a man who had lost a fight with the world. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He didn't come up. He knew he had lost that privilege. "Hi, Dad," he said. His voice was raspy. "Hello, Brandon," I replied. I put down the sandpaper. I didn't invite him to sit. He looked at his shoes. They were cheap sneakers, scuffed at the toes. "I just wanted to come by," he started, struggling with the words. I wanted to say I am sorry. Not for the car, not for the money, but for the way I treated you. I was arrogant. I was stupid. You were right about everything." I looked at him. I searched his face for the lie. I searched for the manipulation. But for the first time in years, I didn't see it. I saw exhaustion. I saw fear. "I accept your apology," I said quietly. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He took a step forward. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. Honestly, it has been hell. Brittany is gone. The lawyers are eating me alive. I am staying in a motel that smells like bleach and despair. I am trying, Dad. I really am, but I just need a little help to get back on my feet. Just a push." There it was. The ask, the pivot, the apology was real, but it was also a key, and he was trying to use it to unlock the bank vault. "I need a deposit for an apartment," he said, rushing the words now. "Just $2,000. First and last month's rent. I can't get a job if I don't have a permanent address. If you can just loan me that, I swear I will pay you back. I will sign a note. I will do whatever you want." I looked at my son. I loved him. God, I loved him. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go inside, write the check, and fix his pain. It would be so easy. $2,000 was nothing to me. It was the price of peace. But I remembered the bookshelf. I remembered that if you use cheap wood for the foundation, the whole thing collapses when the load gets heavy. I had been the cheap wood for 30 years. I had to be the steel. I reached into my shirt pocket. I pulled out an envelope. Brandon's eyes locked onto it. He thought it was a check. He thought he had won. He let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders sagging in relief. "I knew you wouldn't let me drown, Dad," he whispered. "Thank you." I walked down the steps. I stood in front of him. I held out the envelope. He took it. His hands were shaking. He tore it open, eager for the salvation inside. He pulled out the paper. It wasn't a check. It was a single page. A printed application form for a heavy equipment crew on a commercial dockyard in Bremerton. Stapled to it was a business card for a foreman named Miller. Brandon stared at it. He flipped the paper over, looking for the money. He looked back at the envelope. Empty. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "That is a job," I said. "I called Miller this morning. He owes me a favor from a project we did in '99. He is looking for general laborers. It is hard work, Brandon. You will be hauling steel cables in the rain. You will be waking up at 4 in the morning. Your back will hurt. Your hands will bleed. It pays $18 an hour." $18. Brandon looked at me in horror. "Dad, I made 6 figures. I can't live on $18 an hour." "You can," I said. "Millions of people do. You will rent a room, not an apartment. You will take the bus. You will cook your own food, and you will save every dime." "I asked for a loan," he said, his voice cracking. "I asked for help." "This is help," I said. "Giving you money isn't help, Brandon. It is morphine. It numbs the pain, but it doesn't cure the disease. The disease is that you think you are too good to sweat. You think you are entitled to an outcome you didn't earn." I stepped closer to him. "If I give you that money, you will be back here in a month asking for more. You will never change. But if you take this job, if you show up every day, if you learn what it feels like to be tired because you worked, not because you worried, then you might actually become the man I know you can be." He crumpled the paper in his fist. Tears streamed down his face. "You are cruel," he sobbed. "You are enjoying this. I am not enjoying this." I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This is the hardest thing I have ever done. I am watching my son bleed, and I am refusing to give him a bandage because I know the wound needs to air out to heal." I pointed to the paper in his hand. "Miller is expecting you tomorrow at 5 a.m. If you are 1 minute late, the job is gone. It is up to you, son. You can throw that paper in the trash and walk away, or you can get on the bus and go to work." I turned around. I walked back up the steps. My legs felt heavy. I wanted him to scream. I wanted him to throw the paper at me. But he didn't. I picked up the sandpaper again. I didn't look back. I heard him standing there for a long time. I heard his ragged breathing. I heard the wind rustling the hydrangeas. Then I heard footsteps. They were walking away. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I put the sandpaper down and sat in the rocking chair. I closed my eyes. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sylvia. "He called Miller," the text read. "He starts tomorrow." I let out a breath and looked at the sunset. painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He had taken the fishing rod. I picked up my phone and opened the photo gallery. I looked at a picture of Leo. He was smiling, missing a front tooth. I dialed the number for the 529 education plan. I authorized the monthly deposit. Then I called the florist and ordered a bouquet for Brittany's parents' house with a card that just said, "For Leo." I wasn't a villain. I wasn't a hero. I was just a father who finally learned the difference between love and enabling. People think love is a soft blanket. They think it is saying yes. They think it is shielding someone from the cold. But sometimes true love is a wall. Sometimes love is standing in the doorway and saying no so that the person you love has to find their own way through. It had cost me my relationship with my son, at least for now. It had cost me the illusion of a happy family. But as I sat there in the quiet of the evening, I knew I had bought something priceless. I had bought him his dignity, and I had bought myself peace. Tomorrow I would go to the post office. I would mail the bookshelf to Leo, and then I would drive to the coast. I would watch the waves crash against the rocks, breaking them down over centuries, turning jagged stone into smooth sand. Life is hard. It breaks us all. But it is in the breaking that we find out what we are actually made of. I am Douglas Carter. I am a builder. And today I finally laid the first brick of a foundation that might actually last. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to practice tough love, or if you are the one who had to learn the hard way, tell me in the comments. And remember, the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Until next time.